Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the SEMC AAMG joint program called Finding Your Seat, Assessing Organizational Culture. My name is Zinnia Willits, and I am the Executive Director of the Southeastern Museums Conference. A warm welcome to everyone joining us tonight. For those who may not be familiar with SEMC, we are a regional professional organization representing museums and museum staff in the 12 Southeastern states, as well as in the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. We have a membership of over 1,800 and continue to grow. SEMC is thrilled to be part of today's program and even more excited that it was developed in continued partnership with the Association of Academic Museums and Galleries. The SEMC AAMG collaboration on Launchpad programs is a tangible example of the power of partnerships, peer-to-peer connection, learning, and camaraderie. I'm so thankful to Alex Chamberlain, AAMG's virtual administrator, and Kristina Durocher, AAMG's president, for oversight and collaboration on tonight's virtual session, and look forward to our continued development of Launchpad programs. I'd also like to acknowledge Banks Creative in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina, today's program sponsor and the talent behind the Launchpad branding and promotional graphics. Also, thank you to the Gaylord and Dorothy Donnelly Foundation for the significant support they have provided to SEMC to make these programs possible and allow us to keep them free for all to attend. Just a few housekeeping notes before I introduce tonight's panel. This session is being recorded and we'll share the video as soon as it's ready. Closed captioning is also available for today's program, and you can turn it on via the CC button at the bottom of your screen. Make sure that you enable the auto transcription feature. I'm certain there will be many questions for our moderator and speakers, and I encourage you to put them in the Q&A box so we can keep track and address them at various points during the program and then again at the end. Finally, while this is a Zoom webinar and your cameras are off, I encourage you to speak freely and engage with your colleagues in the chat, which I remembered to make accessible to everybody tonight. And those comments will not be captured in the recording. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. First, we have our program moderator, Kristina Durocher. Kristina is the director and curator of the Museum of Art of the University of New Hampshire, as well as the current president of the Association of Academic Museums and Galleries. Kristina is a strong advocate for giving back to the museum profession and arts community and enjoys connecting with colleagues from across the field to strengthen opportunities for professional development. Next, I am pleased to introduce our first panelist, Dr. Jay Boda, Associate Director of Academic Affairs and Collections at the John and Mable Ringling Museum of Art in Sarasota, Florida. Dr. Boda joined the faculty of the Ringling in January 2022. His research interests include visitor-centered curation, museum education, transmedia storytelling, reflective judgment, and museum professional development. He supervises the Ringling's academic programs and in-residence student interns enrolled in the Museums and Cultural Heritage Studies and Edu-Curation programs, while teaching 2 graduate seminars for the Department of Art History. He also oversees the Ringling's archives, collections, education, and library departments. That's a lot. Also, next, please welcome our next panelist, Amelia Gallo, who serves as the Programs and Membership Manager at the Thomasville History Center in Thomasville, Georgia. Amelia has been at the Thomasville History Center since 2012, when she was hired as the educator and assistant to the director. In the years since, her responsibilities and title have evolved to head of community engagement, and she now handles all membership and donations, as well as programs, activities, interpretation, and hands-on experiences for visitors of all ages. Finally, it's my pleasure to introduce Virginia Howell, Director of the Robert C. Williams Papermaking Museum in Atlanta, Georgia. Virginia has been with the Paper Museum for 10 years, and prior to that was a museum educator at the Rinalda House Museum of American Art in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, the program coordinator at the North Carolina State Capitol, and an educator at Cape Fear Museum of History and Science in Wilmington, North Carolina. A huge thank you to all of you for being with us today and for sharing your experiences working within different types of organizational cultures, navigating job descriptions, and more. There's lots to dive into. On behalf of SEMC and AAMG, we are so appreciative of your willingness to speak on these topics, which is not always easy or comfortable, but provides essential shared connection points for all of us. Now I'm pleased to turn the floor over to Kristina Durocher and our panelists to begin the discussion.
Thanks so much, Zinnia. It's great to be with you and with all of the participants and attendees who are attending this Launchpad event. I'd like to thank you for organizing this with AAMG. I'd like to thank Heather and Alex, who are on standby and handling any kind of technical issues that may come up. I'd also like to thank our panelists, Jay Boda, Amelia Gallo, and Virginia Howell, who agreed to open up their organizations to us. It's really important that we're able to share and connect, and this is one way that we're able to do that. If you're not a member of AAMG, I'd encourage you to become a member so that we can continue to bring you exceptional programs like this. And I'd also like to thank all of the AAMG members who might be on this call who agreed to review resumes for emergent and student people entering the field. So thank you for that. So we're going to get started. Again, this is following up on the resume reviews that were held earlier this month. We wanted to know how many of you are just starting out in your career. So we have a poll just to get a feel for where people are in their job search. So Zinnia is going to launch that poll and you can just fill it in and we'll kind of see where people are.
It's up there. I'm just going to give them a minute and then I will share the results. Okay.
Are the results in?
Yep. Can you see those?
Yeah, I can. So, you know, it's interesting to see that half of you on the call are not looking for a job. About 40% of you are actively seeking. And again, just a few of you are contemplating a career search. So this conversation hopefully will cover whatever stage of job search you're in. And if you're thinking of staying in your current position and are happy where you are, I think discussing job descriptions, hiring processes, and organizational structure will be of benefit to you as well. So we're going to get started with our panelists, and I'm going to ask each of you to describe briefly your organization, and maybe you can kind of touch upon whether you're year-round or seasonal. If you're an independent museum or you're part of an academic institution, the number of people that are employed at your museum, maybe getting into some of the details, full-time, part-time, but kind of give us a synopsis. And Jay, we'll begin with you, and then we'll go to Amelia and then Virginia.
Thanks, Kristina. Thanks for inviting us all to speak as panelists tonight. I'm at the Ringling Museum, properly named the John and Mable Ringling Museum of Art. We are a large university museum governed by the Florida State University here in Sarasota. Florida State University is in Tallahassee. We're 5 hours away in Sarasota. And we have been governed by Florida State since around the year 2000, but the museum actually dates back to 1930 when John and Mable Ringling established the museum and then donated it to the state of Florida upon John's death in 1936. Currently, the museum has about 200 employees. About 100 of them are full-time employees, about another 100 are part-time, and then we have about 200 volunteers as part of our volunteer corps, which is a lot less. It's less than half than what we used to have pre-pandemic. We used to have a lot more volunteers in our institution. We're open year-round. I believe you asked us about grant funded position. Most of our positions are not. We do have some endowed positions. 4 of the 7 of our curators are endowed positions. We do have some grant funded though. We have some teaching artists that are grant funded, but the majority of positions are funded either through the state of Florida as part of being in the university, or endowments, or through our auxiliary fund, which is basically our revenue streams of ticket sales, things like that. Did you ask about supervision at this point or no?
No, but I'd be happy to hear how many people you in this large organization you personally supervise. How many people report to you?
Sure. As direct reports, I have 5 people who directly report to me as part of what's called the program team. Zinnia was explaining that I oversee, I don't manage, I don't directly supervise the archives, education, library, and collections departments. I oversee those department heads. And within the program team area, which includes curatorial as well, there's about 30 people in the program team area. And then I directly report to the executive director of the Ringling, who's Stephen High, who is considered at the university level a dean of a college, and he reports to the provost of Florida State, who then reports to the president.
Terrific. Thank you so much for that. Emilio, why don't we turn to you next, and you can describe your organization and similar things, number of people, employees, who you supervise, number of direct reports, and who you report to.
Sure. So I'm on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. The Thomasville History Center is a small nonprofit museum in Thomasville, Georgia, which is ironically located about an hour north of Florida State University in Tallahassee. So close connection there. Our institution was established as a historical society in 1952 and opened a museum in our current location in 1972, where it's been ever since. Our primary campus has 8 historic buildings, all of which are interpreted, and we operate the Lapham-Patterson House, which is a historic house owned by the state of Georgia and Department of Natural Resources. They closed the house in 2009, 2010, and we've operated it under a concession agreement, so we manage it and all of that since then. So technically we do operate 2 museums. Fortunately, they're right across the street from each other. We have 4 full-time staff members, and I had to actually ask our director today because I'd lost track. We're up to 7 part-time staff, and when we say part-time, we mean incredibly part-time. Some are working as little as 3 hours a week, and some are about 10 hours a week. So those positions range from, and most recently, a bookkeeper, and someone hired to take over the marketing of the Lapham-Patterson House. We have a work-based learning student who's a high schooler, who's our membership associate. So she kind of has helped me in that position, taking some of that processing off of my plate. We have a gentleman who comes and works on our antique cars in the garage every once in a while. So he counts for us. He keeps them running. And then we have 2 part-time people who do tours at the Lapham-Patterson House about twice a month. So on top of that, we do have 1 part-time grant-funded position. The History Center received an NEH grant to do a teacher workshop this summer. So we have a Florida State student who comes in a few hours a week and is helping to do some preliminary research for that. And then in terms of volunteers, we do have about 5 who are on a weekly schedule that come in and do collections-based work with us. And then we have a larger core of volunteers that help for special events and fundraisers and all of that. So our board of directors also rotates in for that. We have a 17-member board. As one of them liked to point out yesterday, we're not a small museum, we're boutique. So that was her favorite phrase of the day.
I love that.
Yeah. So I report directly to the executive director. So it's executive director reports to the board of directors, and we have a curator, myself, and an assistant curator, and then part-time staff who are on same level. So it's a very simple org chart for us. And we're open year round. We're only closed for major holidays.
Okay, good. Well, that's great. Thank you for explaining that to us. And Virginia, why don't you talk about the Papermaking Museum and your structure?
Absolutely. So the Robert C. Williams Museum of Papermaking was founded in 1939, and we've had a couple of homes until we landed at Georgia Tech. So we were at MIT for a while, and then we were in Appleton, Wisconsin at the Institute of Paper Chemistry. And then the Institute of Paper Chemistry moved to Atlanta. The museum came along with it, and we became part of Georgia Tech in 2003. So structurally, the museum is within something that's an interdisciplinary research institute. In university speak, it's an IRI, and we love our acronyms. So we are on the research side of the school rather than being on the academic side of the school. The museum itself has about 100,000 artifacts, but remember, most of it's paper, so it's fairly small in terms of volume. Lots of numbers, tiny little pieces. We have a staff of 4 full-time staff. We just received our 4th staff member, who's actually a postdoctoral fellow, who is helping us to do more integration of scientific concepts into the work that the museum does, and to translate the work that's being done at the university in paper-related fields into language that's accessible by non-scientists. So people who haven't had chemistry since 10th grade, we're going to put it into terms you'll understand. So there are 4 of us in that capacity, and then we have 4 volunteers, and then we have about 7 student employees who work from between 3 to 10 hours a week, so fairly small. We could be in that boutique side of things as well. In terms of reporting, I report to the head of the Renewable Bioproducts Institute, who reports to the vice president for research at Georgia Tech, who then reports to the campus president. So, and then within the museum, it is a fairly flat structure. The other staff report to me.
Okay.
Oh, and we're open year round, only closed for university holidays.
Terrific. In listening to you all, even though the Ringling Museum, over 200 people, volunteers, and then Amelia, yours is smaller, there's a lot of complexity. I'm hearing different ways that people can come into your institution. You've got volunteers, you've got board members, you've got researchers. One of the things that we had talked about was just how all of these pieces fit together and what that structure looks like in order for your organizations to operate. So I'm going to put up, well, I'm not going to, but by the magic of technology, there's going to be a screen that shows you some organizational structure types. And maybe you can look at those. We have another poll for those people online for them to consider, for you to consider your own institution. Our panelists cannot actually participate in the poll, but maybe you could talk about where you think you fall in this structure type while people are responding to the poll. And Virginia, since you went last, I'll have you go first. Where do you see yourself within this structure within the university?
So within the museum itself, we are definitely in the flat component. It is myself, and then all other reports report to me within it. Within our larger, within the school, I would say it's it's more of a divisional circumstance, but within the museum, we are definitely flat.
Okay. Amelia, how about you? You've got multiple buildings, museums, and across the street from one another. Where do you think you fall?
So yeah, even with all of that, very similar to Virginia, I think flat is how we would be best described, but really divisional. We are each, in a way, our own department heads, even if we don't have people who directly report to us. That would fall under volunteers who would tend to get assigned to us to supervise their projects, or for me, at fundraisers and special events. So we kind of straddle those two as well.
Okay. Jay, do you want to jump in?
Sure. It's kind of, we are a fairly large organization, as 200 people would indicate, but we are kind of between divisional and functional. Divisional in the idea that we do have departments. We have people are organized within departments like the archives, education, collections, but also IT, HR, events, security, things like that. But we are also functional in the idea, if you look at our org chart, we have 3 different sections, and our departments are grouped in those functional sections. So we have an operational team, and that would be our visitor services team, our marketing team, HR, security, retail is in there. Mainly all of our folks that keep everything running day to day at the Ringling. And then we have a program team, of which I'm the senior member of that team. And that would be considered kind of like our content team. So we're the content generators of the Ringling. So all of our curatorial staff, our archive staff, collections, conservation, education. And then we also have an advancement team. So that would be our development team members, our membership team members, our grants team is also in there. So they're folks that are really promoting the idea of growing our organization through philanthropy, membership, and grant and endowments. So we're functional in one way, but also divisional as well.
Okay.
And I also, just for the magic of the Zoom world, I gave my org charts to someone. I think I put it up on the Google link. So if anybody wanted to share that, you're very welcome to either drop it in the chat or share it on the screen.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that. Thanks, Jay, for reminding me. I think Heather put that link in the chat. But for people who are looking for a job, going to the organization that you're interested in applying to, or even looking at other museums in your area and going online and seeing how they're structured, or if their org charts are available, will give you a sense of where you might fit into that organization when you're evaluating the position that's advertised. If you're thinking about applying to it, try to look and include that as part of your research to determine where you would be fitting into that, where that position sits within the org chart. So Jay, thank you for sharing that with us. One of the things that you all sort of talked about is sort of the language that you use in describing how you're managing your work or how you're actually conducting your work. So I heard oversee, I heard manage, I heard supervise. I didn't hear recruit, but it could be part of that. For all of those kinds of descriptors, when you are bringing somebody on board to your organization, do you have a human resources department, or are you yourselves writing those job descriptions? And any one of you can jump in, but if to get started, Amelia, why don't we start with you? Do you write those job descriptions, or do you have an HR department?
We don't have an HR department. Our director handles that. She handles all of the job descriptions, interviewing, and all of that. I was involved with the writing of the job description and the hiring of our work-based learning student this semester, because it was something we'd never done before, and it was very specifically designed to take some responsibilities or some tasks off of my plate with the shift in my title. So I was involved in doing that, and I was responsible for preparing her materials for her onboarding and, helping her get acclimated, because what high schooler knows how to use Past Perfect and accounting software? So that's really the only instance so far in my experience, but we are in a process of growth. So I don't know what that might entail in the future.
Okay.
So we, as part of the university, we do utilize the human resources department for our school. And that has some real assets with it in that they are managing the posting and a lot of the filtering of things for us. But it also has some drawbacks in that we tend to have to use pre-existing job descriptions. And so you can do a little bit of tweaking, but it doesn't necessarily reflect the actual scope of the work. So we really have to make sure that when we are doing the interviewing, that we're making sure folks understand that, well, it says X, Y, and Z, but what it really means is 1, 2, and 3. For example, our education position is actually Education Outreach Coordinator 2, which it doesn't really sound like anything. And then when you read the description, it doesn't actually describe the work that's happening in a very abstract way. Yes, but the day-to-day activities of that position, it's not what it does at all. So that's a bit of a challenge. To get a new position written is a huge challenge. So we're kind of encouraged to find something that already exists and then make that work. So I'd say anybody who's looking at some universities, if it doesn't have museum in the job description, it's kind of a catch-all position that it's also admin things that are happening in other departments. So you may have to do a little bit more of a deep dive to find out exactly what's going on with that position.
So I just want to follow up with that, Virginia. So how would somebody who's newly minted, looking for work, how would they read between the lines of a job description like that? If there's something like, if somebody's looking at a job and it seems to be this catch-all, the language might be vague, what would you recommend for sort of reading between the lines? What would jump out with an applicant?
I would encourage them to then actually do some research on the institution itself. And so if you're seeing something that's a Outreach Coordinator 2, and then you go and you look at the website and see that there are 3 staff members listed, it's probably going to be a bigger type of job than a purely administrative task. And it may be that the lines like responsible for oversight of program booking also means that you're oversight because you're leading all of the programs. You're not coordinating guest artists. You are actually the person who is going to be doing the programming. And hopefully the organization will have been able to include language somewhere that says specific duties will include the following X, Y, and Z.
Okay. Jay, I'm going to just switch gears here a little bit. You're at such a large institution. When somebody new comes on, what's the onboarding process like? And I know that you're leading a team of people, so you may not be necessarily involved in the training process, but even at your level, what's it like for somebody new who joins your institution?
Sure. We're lucky in that while we are part of Florida State University, we have a branch of HR that is embedded at the Ringling. So we have an HR office at the Ringling, dedicated folks that are helping us onboard and do all the things that you need. So you can I literally walk across the hall if I have questions. It's really helpful, especially like what Virginia was explaining. It's very difficult to update position descriptions, and they help us kind of take university language position descriptions and make them appropriate for museums. So that's they're pros at that. So we really appreciate it. But for onboarding, because we're a state institution, the onboarding process is fairly uniform as people come on board. If you're coming on board as a volunteer, as an intern, as a fellow, as a part-time or a full-time employee, everyone has to go through an online portion of onboarding. It's called smart onboarding. It happens before you don't even have to be here. We can interview you somewhere else in the country and do all of this remotely, which is kind of nice. But that entails fingerprinting, background checks, things of that nature, filling out requisite types of paperwork. And then once you get here on your first day of work, there's a series of briefings that the HR department will lead. Everyone has to go through that deals with safety procedures, things like that, but also we have certain diversity, equity, inclusion briefings that we want all employees to have when they onboard. And then when they go into the departments, each department has its series of trainings that department supervisors lead. And in my particular area, overseeing interns and fellows, we do a welcome week where we bring all interns through campus. Well, there's an intern specific orientation, but departments also have a specific orientation. But then I lead campus tours because it's a 66-acre campus, lots of venues. So we want everyone to take our org chart and then this abstract concept of all these areas, but then make them more concrete by actually visiting the entire campus. So there's that process of bringing someone in. And then we do an all staff, or I should say all department introductory type session where all department heads or someone representing a department will stand up, explain, do a very, very brief introduction of what their department does, how they fit into the org chart and the mission, and how they support our strategic plan, things like that. So it's a 3-day session of onboarding that we do. And then once they're released into the departments, then they work with their supervisors to come up to speed and go through perhaps other specific trainings. Like if you go into the collections department, there's a series of safety types of things that you have to do. So you learn preparation and things like that.
That sounds really intense. Is that just held annually when you have the interns coming in, or do you usually have all staff meeting multiple times a year where you make those kinds of introductions?
For employees, it's quarterly.
Okay.
And then for interns, it's when interns, we typically start interns at the beginning of fall semester, spring semester, and then we have a summer internship program. So I host that 3 times a year, specific to the interns. Yeah, that's how that happens.
That's amazing. That's really intense. I love how thoughtful it is. Amelia, I was wondering if you could talk about onboarding at your institution, which although smaller is as complex and has many different moving pieces as well.
So yeah, other than the kind of more recent bringing in of additional part-time folks, our full-time staff have all been there for a very long time. So kind of our onboarding has happened in different phases, and for 2 of us under different directors. So, it's kind of evolved. My onboarding was very minimal. I had to be there in less than 2 weeks and was handed a list of summer camp activities that I was teaching the following week and said, good luck. And then the actual process of getting me prepared happened, over the course of a couple months after that. But right now we have, just a very basic process that our director takes everybody through. It's the standard paperwork. They're given a full tour of both properties, introduced to all of the staff, and kind of given a rundown of who does what. We actually have a more structured onboarding process for our board of directors every year. So as new, which is a little bit more comparable, as new board members come in January, February, they have a sit down meeting with our director. She runs them through kind of all of the things they'll be exposed to as a board member, kind of how the financials work, some of our different committees, and then they're given again a full property tour, introduced to all of the staff. And some years we'll even do very similar to what Jay was saying, kind of miniature presentations of what each of us are responsible for. So for us, it's more so kind of orientation and kind of figuring out where you fit within the small group that we have. And then those individualized part-time staff that we have now, they're given kind of their prep materials of what the tasks that they're going to be responsible for are.
Great. In thinking about onboarding training for people who are new to your organization. At the University of New Hampshire, where I am, there's a probationary period. I don't know if all of you have that, but if you do, how do you communicate and how do you give feedback to new hires when somebody's just getting started? How do you deliver that feedback to them during that early phase when they've entered your organization? Virginia, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. So again, because we are part of a larger institution, we do have a 6-month probationary period for new hires that are permanent. And that is actually something that HR manages to some degree. So there's a certain process for that evaluation. And then at the end of the 6-month period, you submit essentially, did they pass probation or not? It's really a pass-fail situation. I'm a firm believer that there shouldn't be anything that's a surprise in an evaluation situation. You should know going into it what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. With a small staff like ours, there's a lot of daily contact that we have. So problems don't really have the opportunity to grow into big issues because they should be addressed pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And I like to think that that's the case. So, for new hire and like Amelia, we haven't really had a whole lot of folks coming on board. We had our postdoc who joined us, which was a little bit of a different situation. She had a very clear task that was set before her. And but prior to that, our last hire was going on 4 years ago. So it's been a little bit. But really having it set up to have your expectations in place. This is what you need to know. These are the kind of trainings that you need to take by this certain point so that you're able to do this part of your job or that part of the job.
Virginia, and thinking about, sort of that probationary period, and again, you were saying that you don't have that many people to hire. There's a question that's kind of tangential to that in the Q&A. And so somebody wanted to know, like, how does somebody new who's interviewing for a position get a feel beyond the organizational chart for the culture, what those expectations are? So maybe you could respond, like, how is that in a job description or in that orientation? How are you communicating the values and the culture of your organization? You can respond, and then Amelia, and then maybe Jay, you can follow up.
So, I mean, I do think that that's really important when you're in that interviewing stage of, particularly if you're in an institution that it's hard to get a read of what it's like if you aren't familiar with it because you're applying from out of state or something like that and didn't grow up attending that place. Those are the kinds of questions that you want to find out. Is it people primarily work from home, or are people in the office? What's the office culture like? And so as the person who is needing to present my organization to the potential employee, I'd want to talk about how we, have regular staff meetings, that there's a lot of autonomy because it is a small department. And so people are able to choose certain directions that they want to take things into, because if you're the one who has to lead the program, you better enjoy the program. But there's also, you have to meet your mission. So knowing what your mission statement is and why it's your mission and the different things that you do to meet said mission, being able to express that in a conversational way.
Thank you. Amelia, what about you? If somebody were looking to join your organization, what questions should they be asking, or what things might they look for that are unique about your museum?
Given that we have such a small staff and we are pretty defined in terms of departmentally what we do, we try and be pretty transparent with activities that are going on, regularly updating with social media and all of that. So I think if someone has tried to kind of pay close attention to those kind of ways we're presenting ourselves outward, you're going to get a really good sense of what it's like around the museum. We have very little filter in that way. And our process has been pretty informal for a really for a while. And, you know, I'm not part of that hiring process necessarily. So when they are brought around as part of the interview process, we do, you know, have the opportunity to kind of chat a little bit, and they can talk to us about what each of us do and where it all fits in. But just trying to see how the institution is presenting itself outwardly, I think is helpful.
Sure. And Jay, for you, I'm going to just ask a question that was posed in the chat. For somebody who's interviewing at your institution, they have questions about the job description, or maybe something doesn't read right to them. Is it appropriate to reach out to a department head or to reach out to somebody on the leadership team and kind of go outside of the HR hiring process to ask that question directly?
So I'm wondering if the question is asking about, they want more specifics?
They want more specifics about the job, and they're looking to step outside of that HR hiring process and going right to the curator or maybe right to the department head. Is that an appropriate?
I would likely recommend against that. Well, it's probably not possible, or I wouldn't recommend it in our institution anyway. We have to follow some fairly strict hiring policies to maintain equity between candidates. But you can ask, I mean, at least in our organization, and I did this during my own hiring process, ask very direct, specific questions through my HR representative. My fellow panelists may have other perspectives on, you know, going direct to other members. If you have contact information of a curator or a specific department head, you know, that because you've been able to get to them via LinkedIn or something, but if there's there may be ethical issues in that the department head or the curatorial staff or whoever might be in that hiring team or in that chain of authority may say, you know, I appreciate the question, but they may redirect you back to the HR person anyway, just because of particular hiring policies. But ask the questions and do it through the HR rep would be my recommendation.
Good. That's good to know. Yeah. For those of us at academic museums, often there could be a search committee, there could be other reviewers. And so when you step outside of the HR, you know, chain of communication, we have to be very careful to make sure that everyone who's on that search committee has access to the same information. And so we are not encouraged to respond directly to candidates. So that's something really important for people who are on the chat to know about.
Can I just add on one thing that Amelia was talking about as far as like looking at the outward facing information that an institution provides? I think that's really key. I did that looking at the Ringling, and you can ask. I asked for the org chart of the Ringling prior to my hire. I asked for any strategic planning documents that they have, and I was given both, and they were really happy to give them. They asked that I think put me in a good light that I was curious in that way. We also produce an annual review that we publish publicly on our website. So do your homework on the website, see what kind of documents are available. I put both the strategic plan and the annual review in the Dropbox for this session, and happy to share those. If whoever's running our chat box wants to put those links, you're very welcome to. But you can learn about the culture of an organization that way. And I'll put the link for our strategic plan webpage, which lists our values and things that are very innate into the organization's culture. And just as a last add-on, what you can ask during an interview that will give you some insight into a institution might be asking, how long was your predecessor in the position? Like my predecessor was in the position 11 years. But if it was only like 1 year, or you can ask like, what is the average that people stay at the institution? You can ask that kind of question. That kind of gives you a little insight into the culture of the organization sometimes.
Okay. I'm going to ask something that's really more like nuts and bolts. And just in terms of like, how long start to finish somebody uploads their resume to your job portal? Do you have a phone screener? Is there a recruiter? What is the approximate time for somebody once they've had an interview? Because I think it can vary. I think
It can vary.
It can vary
Yeah.
widely, and I think it depends on who's hiring, how that hiring is done. But for some of the people who are writing in, they want to know, how quickly am I going to get hired?
Well, if you're trying to go into a university situation, it can be lengthy. I submitted an application in May and I wasn't hired until October. So, but I'm a member of faculty, so that's a different hiring process, and there's different classifications of positions as well. So, but if you're coming in as a full-time administrative professional type level position, putting in that application, and the window closes 2 weeks later, you should hear back within, at least in our organization, within a couple of weeks, whether or not you're going to get an interview. And then after the interview, and maybe another couple of weeks on a decision. And then our onboarding process can take some time. So, from interview to a potential hire could, for a full-time position, take a couple of months. It kind of can take that way. But if you're a direct hire into a part-time position, it can be, a week or two. It just kind of depends.
Amelia, I wanted to ask you, if somebody were to interview in person, let's say they were screened over the phone, they interview at your institution in person, what is sort of things that an applicant might expect for the structure of that in-person interview? Is it going to include a tour? And the reason why I ask is because I have one of those interview horror stories of my own, in which I was asked to interview at an organization and they did not tell me that it was an all-day interview. And I was there for 6.5 hours, expecting to be there for 2 at the most. And so no surprises, but do you provide an itinerary, or what would somebody expect? What would that first in-person look like?
I'm not sure right now exactly how our director handles that, because she's doing that communication. So usually from what I've observed, if someone's coming in for like a part-time position, they're usually on site for an hour or two. They'll have a conversation, they'll do the interview, and then they are shown around the property, introduced to the rest of the staff and all of that. When I was brought in, it was a longer interview. I had the same thing. I had a conversation with the director, was shown around, and then it immediately, because they were very much pressed for time to get somebody into my position, was, how soon can you be here? And we'll help you find a place to live, etc. It was a very, 12 years ago, kind of slightly different. When they hired our current director about 7 years ago, given the position she was coming into and the fact that our retiring director had been there for more than 20 years, she actually had I want to say it was like a half-day long interview with board members and the outgoing director, and it was at the Lapham Patterson house, and it was involved, being shown around. She also had a conversation with myself and my coworker, who were the only other 2 staff at that point. We weren't necessarily interviewing her, but, just kind of having a conversation about how things go and how the museums run, what we would like to see, that kind of thing. So in my case, and I kind of think hers, the decision had almost already been made that we were the choices, versus, having multiple candidates coming in. And again, we don't hire for these full-time positions that would have these more intensive processes. Very often, I've been there 12 years, our director's been there 7, our curator's been there 15, and our assistant curator transitioned from intern to full-time and part-time staff to full-time staff over the course of about 4 or 5 years. So, the process has been a little different for all of us.
And Virginia, you're at an academic museum. Maybe you could explain the same process, the interviewing process. And for some of those technical positions, are you looking for supplemental materials in an application? Are you doing research on somebody's publications for like a postdoc? Maybe you could talk about the academic side of
Sure.
what might be included in supplemental materials.
Okay. So for us, the hiring often takes quite a while as well. When I got hired on, it took 6 months, and I'm not in a faculty position. I am in a staff position. I applied in September and I started in February. So, and that was kind of fast. I've also would say for folks that are looking, if you're looking at state positions as well, they tend to have very long hiring times in like the 6 month to a year often. They'll have hiring freezes that you don't know anything about, and there's absolutely nothing that you can do about it until they decide that they're going to lift that hiring freeze. And the site really needs to have staff, but they don't get to have it. So I just wanted to put that out there for folks who are looking. It is not necessarily you if you're not hearing anything. It's just that for many places, it is a slow process that they're having to go through. So one of the things that we would do with our interviewing process when we were hiring for the education position a few years ago, we did basically a 30-minute screening phone call with about 6 candidates, and then we reduced that down to our top 3 to come for an in-person. And for that, we asked them to bring a writing example of how they would do a program, and then we provided them with a writing prompt in the interview for them to outline out how a program would be done, just so we could see what sort of philosophy they would be utilizing. And they knew this in advance, that they would be having these sort of things. It was not a surprise. And we kept that to about a 2.5 hour, I think, interview for that, and included a tour of the site as well. Our postdoc is kind of a unique situation. We had actually asked for a full-time position to do something else, and the people who divvy up the money said, "That was a nice request. We're going to give you money for a 1-year postdoc. Here you go." So that was a whole different level of challenges. So we had already identified the person who was going to take the postdoc. She was actually going to come on as a part-time person. And then we were able to transition it into a postdoctoral position. So we were not looking at publications in that particular case. So it's not quite as academic as it would otherwise be. It's more on the informal side of things. But going forward, if we are going to incorporate more of the scientific content and having essentially a science translator on staff, if you will, what's going to be really important is seeing how well they can navigate between the highly complex language of research and academia and essentially civilian life. Can you take these concepts and turn them into something that, science is scary. So, and that's in scare quotes. So how do you make it not scary? How do you make it exciting? And my cat is going to come back on in just a second. Here he is. Knox was feeling left out. So for us, it would be more important to be able to see the ability to communicate across all spectrums of audience participation.
Great. Thank you for that. That's very instructive. We have just 5 minutes left, and I wanted to make sure I got this question to you. So if you've submitted your resume, your CV, and you put it into sort of the online portal for that or submitted it electronically, but you don't really know who the hiring manager is, how do you follow up? Who do you follow up with at the organization just to make sure that it's been received, and to let somebody know that you're out there and interested.
I'm
Amelia,
just, I'll just.
or Jay?
Yeah, well, all of ours are pretty standard as far as all of our listings. So it's we include our HR employment information, and if it's not, if you encounter an organization that hasn't included that information in the job ad, that's troublesome. It's like, I don't want to say it's a red flag, but it's go to the organization's website. You know, you should be able to find careers or employment, and there should be a link, and you reach out.
Okay. I would say the same thing again, because of how you have to apply for our system. There would be an HR contact that you would need to reach out to ensure that it was received.
Okay. Amelia, I'd like to end with you because you started when we first met that you were the intern forever. So for somebody who got their start in museums as an intern and are now working independently, why don't you put out some words of encouragement for some of the people who are looking for work and maybe have started as an intern like you?
So for context, I was in grad school at University of North Carolina at Greensboro. You know, the requirement that most programs do, I had to have an internship between my first and second year over the summer. And I knew, you know, for financial reasons, et cetera, that it needed to be in my hometown of Wilmington, North Carolina. So was able to secure an internship at the Cape Fear Museum. And I happened to be assigned to Virginia. So she was my internship supervisor way back when. And so, you know, learned everything I know about how to keep an education closet organized from Virginia.
Very important.
Very, very important. I'm failing right now, but we'll get there. So, you know, I'm a horrible example for this. My falling into my job was kind of a fluke. I happened, you know, as you do in grad school, you put applications in anywhere and say, I can live anywhere for a year. And 11 years later, I'm still in that you can do anything for a year job because it has changed and evolved so much. Our organization has grown. My responsibilities have changed. I've been able to be involved in updating my job description to better describe what I'm actually doing, updating my title to better describe what I actually do. So it was an unusual position to be in, that the organization needed someone immediately. I was available to get here immediately and, you know, have happened to still be here. So I don't know that I'm quite the best example of that, but I am Virginia's perpetual intern.
Yep. We do annual reviews of how she's doing.
I provide good snacks.
She does.
I game the system.
That's key. That's key. Well, listen, we are at time, and I'd like to thank each of you for sharing information about your job, your role, and your institution. So Jay, Amelia, and Virginia, it was absolutely super to be able to moderate this panel. I learned quite a bit as well, and I hope all of the people who were listening in did. And Zinnia, thank you. I'll turn it over to you to close out the night. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, I just want to say I love this conversation. I'm sorry I put like 1,000 comments in the chat. Like the whole idea of assessing organizational culture. I mean, we'll continue to talk about this. We'll find a way to go further because there are, and thanks to each of you and Kristina for moderating, for touching on these points about what to think about and what to look for, because you want a job where you feel comfortable, and it's the interview process is what it is. So it's sort of these between the lines and how to look a little bit deeper into the organizational chart and you know, the process and the onboarding, all of it, just such great advice. So as always, it was a pleasure. I appreciate all of you. Thank you to everybody who came. I know, you know, after a work day is not the easiest time, but it was a great conversation, and we'll do more. We have another one. Kristina, what's our next one in the fall? Oh, still me.
We're going to be focusing exclusively on culture and how organizations transmit culture in their outward facing presentation. Some of you touched on that tonight. Everything from social to web to materials to team building and all staff meetings like Jay mentioned. So that's going to be the focus just on culture and how that's maintained.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all. I hope everybody has a great rest of the week. Thank you for your participation. We will have the recording of this out to everyone who registered as soon as we get to that, probably by the end of the week. That's always my goal. And we'll look forward to seeing you at the next Launchpad series between SEMC and AAMG. Great partnership. See everybody soon. Bye. Thank you all.
Nice job.